Hi, I'm the History Guy, and if you didn't know, in addition to our channel on YouTube, we also have a page on Patreon, where for just $1 a month you can support the work of the History Guy and also get all of our content advertising free. In addition, patrons on Patreon get access to one exclusive video a month that is made just for patrons on Patreon, and for the last year and a half that's been a series on the History Guy's hats. And every once in a while when we're traveling, we're able to bring one of those episodes here to the YouTube audience. Today, I'm going to talk about a hat that became famous in England, where it was created, but had a huge impact across the pond, an icon of entertainment, culture, and a British gentleman. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You know, my collection is mostly military hats. I think that's what I'm known for, but it's not the only kind of hat that I collect. And today I'm going to talk about a hat that's really a fashion hat. In fact, a hat that has been in fashion for a surprisingly long time and used in a surprising number of situations. This is the kind of hat that's called a bowler hat, or in the United States it's sometimes referred to as a derby hat. It's more associated with the United Kingdom, but it was also very popular in the United States, played an important role in American history. In fact, this particular hat is made by an American company, the Mallory Company, which purports to be the oldest hat maker in the United States, and is more known for inventing another style of hat called the fedora. I don't really know how old this hat is. My guess is sometime early in the last century, at least prior to the 1940s when the Mallory Company was acquired by the Stetson Company. According to the label, it was made for the Russell Clothing Store, which is in Byron, Ohio, which doesn't appear to be in business anymore. And unfortunately for me, this wonderful, clean, collectible hat, too small for my head. The bowler is an incredibly well-known hat design, worn by, for example, future presidents and future prime ministers. The history of the bowler goes back to 1849 and Thomas William Cook, the second Earl of Leicester. Cook owned a large estate in Norfolk called Holcombe and had gamekeepers taking care of the game on the large estate. The gamekeepers had been wearing top hats as part of their uniform, but riding in top hats was problematic as they were knocked off by branches and wind and were prone to bend or crumple when they fell. The Earl was tired of having to buy new hats. Cook's younger brother, Edward, went to James Lock and Company of St. James Street in London, which is still in business today and bills itself as the world's oldest hat shop. Edward Cook asked the company to make a hat that was tight-fitting to the head, would stay on the wearer's head, and would provide some protection. The protection was from branches, but also the idea might have been to provide some protection of the Earl's gamekeepers should they run into poachers. Lock & Company engaged two London hat makers, Thomas and William Bowler, to build the custom hat design. Now, a bowler hat is made out of felt, and felt is an unwoven fabric. What that means is that felt takes fibers, in the case of a bowler hat, usually wool fibers. It soaks them in chemicals until the fibers flatten out and can be squeezed together to make a cloth that then can be pressed into several different kinds of forms. And one of the chemicals that is typically used in the making of felt is mercury, and constantly breathing those mercury fumes is what led to both the phenomena and the phrase, "mad as a hatter." Felt is then, using a combination of heat, moisture, and pressure, shaped on a hat form, and the Bowler brothers added something else for their new hat design. They added animal fat, although the exact formula is still a mystery. The fat formed a sort of glue that, when combined with the bowl-shaped design, made the hat very hard. According to legend, when Edward Cook returned to get the hat, he first dropped it in the street and stomped on it twice, and seeing that it stood up to the punishment, was satisfied with its strength and paid 12 shillings for it. This is his brother, the Earl, wearing the famous hat designed for him. And these are his gamekeepers, resting in their bowler hats. The hat is still sometimes referred to as a billycock or bob hat in honor of Sir William. Gamekeepers at Holcombe still wear billycocks. But it was the Bowler brothers who started mass-producing the design, and thus the name, the bowler hat. The bowler actually had several variations, but it is basically described as having a bowl-shaped top with a small, slightly upturned brim. The bowl can be relatively high or low, although the hat was originally designed to conform tightly to the head. They are made in many colors, but most often made of black wool felt. One interesting thing about the bowler is that it was originally very much a working-class hat. The same characteristics that Sir William had desired made it useful for miners and railway and factory workers. It was close-fitting, provided protection from elements, and some against injury, was inexpensive, and it stayed on your head. In fact, traditionally, the way that a railway worker knew that a bowler hat fit correctly was to stick their head out of the window of a moving train, and if the hat stayed on, then it was a correct fit. The hat came to the United States in an interesting way. In 1778, Edward Smith Stanley, the 12th Earl of Derby, held a sweepstakes horse race on his estate called the Oaks. The race was called the Oaks Stakes, but starting the following year became known as the Derby Stakes. The term Derby has become a general term traditionally used strictly to refer to races restricted to 3-year-olds, which of course a current example being the Kentucky Derby. The bowler was a particularly good hat for horse racing fans because of its characteristic of not blowing off while, say, riding a horse. And so America's introduction to the bowler hat was as the hat that was worn at a derby. Literally, a derby hat. And so in America, a hat designed for one English earl is named after another English earl who died before that hat was even invented. One of the many ways in which Hollywood has misrepresented the Wild West is in its fashion. To believe Tom Mix, the West was won with men in 10-gallon hats. In actuality, while the traditionally wide-brimmed cowboy hat was used, the derby was much more practical. It was, in fact, literally designed to not fall off while riding a horse. The derby, rather than the sombrero or cowboy hat, was the most popular hat in the Wild West. So much so that author and historian Lucius Beebe described it as the hat that won the West. The hat was used by some of the most famous characters of the West, notorious outlaw Butch Cassidy and his gang, the Wild Bunch, famous lawman and later sports writer Bat Masterson, and stagecoach robber Charles Bowles, better known as Black Bart. In fact, one notorious robber named Marion Hedgepeth, a hired gun often described as one of the fastest guns in the Wild West, was so fond of the hat that he was known as the Derby Kid. The bowler hat has become a cultural icon in many ways. It was the signature style for comedians Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy and Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. It was a defining part of the costume of Charlie Chaplin's character, the Tramp, considered one of the most important figures in the history of the film industry. The hat was so iconic that the bowler hat and cane that Chaplin used in the 1915 film The Little Tramp sold at auction for $62,500 in 2012. The characters in Samuel Beckett's 1953 play, Waiting for Godot, voted the most significant English-language play of the 20th century in a British poll in 1990, are usually portrayed wearing bowler hats. Alex DeLarge, the chilling main character in Stanley Kubrick's influential 1971 dystopian film A Clockwork Orange, wears a bowler hat, as did dapper spy John Steed in the 1960s stylish espionage crime drama series The Avengers. Bowler-wearing J. Willington Wimpy will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. The bowler is so ubiquitous that famous people from heavyweight boxing champion Jack Johnson, to movie star Al Jolson, to inventors Orville and Wilbur Wright, to world-renowned explorer Roald Amundsen, to Enrico Caruso, one of the most famous operatic tenors of all time, have all been famously photographed in a bowler hat. In an odd twist, in the early 20th century, the hat that was designed for utility for the working class became associated with the banking class. The classic stereotype of the London city gent included a bowler and an umbrella with business attire, was popular into the 1970s, although it declined thereafter as styles became less formal. The British bank Bradford and Bingley so associated its brand with the bowler hat that they had more than 100 separate trademarks using bowler hats. When the bank broke up in 2008, one of the significant points of contention was which entity would keep the trademarks. One of the most famous portrayals of the city gent banker was actor David Tomlinson's Mr. Banks in the 1964 film Mary Poppins. Because of its association with the English, the hat is often used by loyalist fraternities such as the Orange Order in Northern Ireland and Scotland. In the 1920s, railroad workers from England brought the hat to Bolivia, where it was adopted by the native population. Now bowlers, called a bombín in Spanish, are considered part of the traditional dress by Quechua and Aymara women. Retired cavalry officers in the British Army wear bowler hats for their annual parade in Hyde Park on what is known as Cavalry Sunday in May, and officers are still expected to wear their city gent attire whenever they are in London on duty. Since 1849, the humble bowler has decorated the heads of kings and queens, and clowns and criminals. And the day of the bowler has not passed. For example, bowlers figure prominently in the fashion of the steampunk subculture. In 2016, the venerable Lock & Company reported a spike in the sale of bowler hats. The hat that was designed 170 years ago for gamekeepers still represents what they call effortless style. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.